One of the stories that I find very touching, something that I reflect on those times when I'm having a rough day, is the story of Mahapajapati Gotami. She was the stepmother of the Buddha. So his birth mother, Maya, died giving birth to him. Gotami married his father, the king, and raised him in a loving home until the day when he left the palace to realize enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. After the Buddha realized enlightenment, however, he did, after a period of time, return home. Maybe he wanted to see his family one last time. Maybe he wanted to share the Dharma with them. Maybe he just wanted them to know he was alive. In either case, when he spoke with Gotami, his stepmother, she was so taken aback by the change in her stepson that when her husband, the king, died, she left the palace, much like the Buddha did, and asked to be ordained as a nun in the Buddhist order. The Buddha, however, refused. It was very uncommon for women to walk a spiritual path at that time in India. So he, being a person of his day, said no. But Gotami did not give up. She, along with 500 women, followed the Buddha over a period of hundreds of miles. Eventually, the Buddha stopped for a period of retreat, and by the time she and her followers caught up to him, their feet were wounded, they were covered in filth, their eyes were filled with tears, and they asked again to be ordained as nuns in the Buddhist order. At this point, Ananda, one of the Buddha's attendants, intervened on their behalf, and they were in fact ordained, becoming the first nuns of the Buddha Dharma. Now that in and of itself is a beautiful story, but there is some historic and cultural context here that really adds to the importance and frankly to the impressiveness of what Gotami did. You see, first we have to understand that she was a queen, and it was unheard of for people of her station to walk anywhere, much less walk on the road. That's why sometimes when you watch movies, you'll see the person, the royalty, the prince, the princess, the queen stand in the middle of the room, and the servants bring the clothes to them. Servants walk, servants run. Royalty sits. So the fact that she was choosing to walk on the ground after the Buddha was an incredible sign of devotion on her part, but there's more to the story even than that. You see, there were no roads in India the way we think of them today. There was no cement, there was no pavement. So she was walking essentially on a very large dirt road. So it was muddy, it was full of rocks. In addition to that, there were no cars. People got around either on foot or they rode on animals. And animals leave urine and dung in the road. So not only was this woman who was used to being carried everywhere on a palanquin, not only was she walking in the mud, but she was walking also through animal urine, animal feces, and we have to remember that there was no sewage during the time of the Buddha. People did their business in the forest, or they did it in chamber pots, and they emptied those chamber pots in the road. So when the sutras tell us that Gotami and her followers, their feet were wounded, that they were covered in filth, that tears were coming from their eyes, what the sutras are saying is that this woman, a former queen, came down from her throne and walked miles upon miles upon miles through the filth, through the mud and rocks, through the animal waste, through the human waste, because she was so taken aback by the change in her son, the Buddha. She was so impressed by the Buddha Dharma that she was not only willing to give up her royal life, but she was willing to humble herself, to walk through the dirtiness and the filthiness of everyday life in her attempt to realize enlightenment. And we're told that she was successful. She did, in fact, become a Arhat in her own right, which is wonderful news. But there's an important analog there, I think, between the life of Gotami and our lives as modern-day Buddhists. Because we, too, have a choice to make. We, too, have to come down from our high horses, from our thrones, from our pedestals, the palaces we create in our mind, and we, too, have to walk through the filth. Now, it may not be literal filth, like she walked through, but we do have to deal with the messiness of daily life. We have to deal with the job, with the family, with the politics, with the bad news. We have to walk on the dirty road that is our everyday existence, because that, my friends, is the road to enlightenment. Oftentimes, as Buddhists, we may fall into the trap of thinking that if we meditate enough, if we chant enough, if we study the sutras enough, then eventually the world won't be able to touch us. Eventually, we will rise up against the difficulties of everyday life. But quite the opposite is true. Buddhism doesn't raise us above the world. Rather, it plunges us deep into the heart of the struggle. It requires us to get down and walk with everyone else. It doesn't elevate us. It humbles us. And it's in that humble state, in that humility, as we walk through the mud, through the rocks, through the waste, that we take one step closer each day towards enlightenment. The road is hard. It's not fun. But if we remember the example set by Gotami, if we remember the life she left in order to walk the path, then we are reminded of the importance of our practice, the importance of awakening, and maybe that will give us strength enough to do the same. Amitabha.